All right, I'd like to get everyone started. I'd like to wish everyone a good afternoon here on the East Coast, and welcome everyone joining today's webinar. We're really happy to have you spend an hour with us. We've prepared some great material for you today. We're going to start with the theory behind emotions' impact on marketing. For that, we're lucky to have James McQuivey. He's a Principal Analyst with Forrester and the author of the CMO's Guide to Emotions, as well as the book Digital Disruption. Once we have the theory down, myself, I'm Greg Dale from Persado, and David Evans, the Senior Director of Client Solutions at Cheetah, will show you that theory in practice through some real-world examples that are all from joint Persado clients, or Cheetah clients. I'd also like to take a second to call out, just from the Persado perspective, what a great partner Cheetah's been for us on our mutual clients. Today, hopefully, we're going to teach you a lot of new things or share some new learnings. And Cheetah's been great at seamlessly integrating those into folks' daily marketing routines. For the agenda today, we want to do a little bit about the order and format. Once we've gone through the theory, the case studies, and examples, James will moderate a Q&A session at the end for the three of us to answer your questions that come up during the webinar. So please, during the webinars, as we mentioned, submit your questions as we go along, and we'll cover as many of them as we can at the end. With all that kind of covered from a housekeeping perspective, I'd love to turn it over to James to kick it off.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Greg. Hello, everyone. This is James McQuivey from Forrester, and I'm really thrilled to be talking about this topic with you. Sounds like we might be getting a little bit of feedback. I'll ask the other folks if they'll be on mute there. Thank you. I've titled my introduction to this conversation, as Greg said, to set up some of the theory, if you will, but it's theory in practice, because I'm going to talk to you about why emotion matters. And if I'd stopped there, you'd say, well, of course, I know that emotion matters. I'm a smart person. And of course you are, and it does. But my argument is that emotion matters now more than it ever has before in our business context. And I'll give you some background on that. In order to make that comparison, I might have to make it absurdly obvious, the reason why this is the case. I'm going to go back in history a little bit. I'm going to claim that your life is emperor-level awesome. And I literally mean that. So here we have Constantine the Great, the founder of what became the Byzantine Empire after the Roman Empire sort of shifted eastward. I could have picked any emperor. I could have picked a pharaoh. I could have picked, think of anyone in the history of the world who was rightly regarded as sitting on top of kingdoms and powers and the ability to do whatever they wanted, have whatever they wanted, eat whatever they wanted, to know whatever they wanted. And if you were to take one of those people and just briefly expose them to the amount of information and power that you have today in your pocket in the form of your mobile phone, or with the addition of wearable technologies, smart speakers in your home, things that we're doing today, not to mention things that we'll be able to do 5 years from now, they would literally be in awe of you. And so I'm using the word awesome in a way that it almost is never used. I'm using it literally, that people of that time frame of any sort, but even emperors, would look at us and say that we have everything we want. And a little side bit to that is that, when you were an emperor in those days, people came to you constantly looking for favors, alliances, what have you. And it's not unlike that today. I mean, let me bring it up to our own modern life. If that's you, that little personage there at the bottom of the screen, there is any number of vendors, offers, companies, startups, everyone who wants to bring you their service, offer you their product, get you to do something with them as a provider or the preferred provider. Well, it's a little bit like sitting on the emperor's throne and having people come to you constantly with boons that they would like to request. And that's when you start to realize that being an emperor is awesome, but it's also a real hassle. This is a real problem for our psychology. Realize that we still have the same basic neural capacity and physiological ability of Constantine the Great from 1,700 years ago. And so how in the world are we supposed to cope with all of these new things? I don't know how he did it. But we today, across millions of us now, are making more complicated decisions than he did. We are having to consider a wider variety of sources and pieces of information and options of where we can spend even our small, non-emperor-like budgets. It becomes legitimately a real hassle. Luckily, evolution has deposited in us the solution to this decision-making problem, whether we were living in the year 300 or whether we're living today. And it really came about because we evolved under this kind of pressure. There were literally for thousands of years existential threats in our environment as a species where every day we could be killed by something, we could be eaten by something, we could fall from our tree and die. That is the kind of pressure under which we evolved. And if you think about it, how did we as human beings develop the capacity to, first of all, know what in our environment is worth paying attention to? Now, if you're very familiar with animal biology today, you could say, oh, okay, animals seem to be wired to be afraid of certain things and sounds, and that's how they stay alive. Well, we have much more complex lives than every other animal out there. And how did we have a mechanism that helps us deal with things that really are chasing us down in the savannah, or things that just in our general everyday lives might accumulate over 30 years and kill us from high blood pressure? How do we have a mechanism that helps us do this? Well, that mechanism is emotion. We had to know what to pay attention to and what to remember, and emotion is the mechanism in our bodies that allows us to not only know what would have killed us 5 years ago or yesterday, but what might kill us 5 years from now. And so you think about emotion being the director, sitting in the director's seat. It's not in control, but it is always present. And remember that, because I'm going to come back to that in a minute. It is always present. Every time you feel motivated to think about something, to pay attention to something, to consider someone's words, to see an ad that appeals to you, emotion is riding along and saying, yes, care more about this, or no, care less about that. And then when you remember it later on, the things that you recall will be those things that emotion deposited more forcefully in you. The result of that today is that in all of these boons that companies are asking us for, please give us your money, please affiliate with us, please subscribe to our offer, emotion tells us what to attend to and remember. Now, the challenge, of course, is that emotion is not just a series of bits of code that we can just rewrite to adapt to our modern circumstances. And that is part of why emotion is becoming so front and center right now in so many of the conversations I'm having with clients and with people in industry. And as I'm talking to them about, all right, use emotion effectively, I'm finding out that there are some common problems and misunderstandings that people are dealing with in how they use emotion. And I'm going to enumerate a couple of those right now, because every marketer I talk to tells me, well, of course, I know emotion. I mean, that's one of the reasons I got into marketing, was the emotion and persuasion, and that's powerful. But most of them are using it wrong, and there's a couple of key reasons for this. Number one, they think that consumers are either rational or emotional. And I need to challenge that thought for you, and if you're deeply wedded to it, I'm going to ask you to divorce it today. And that might be a little painful, but that is just simply not true. I'll come back to that in a second. Number two, they tend to think, well, I just need to aim for general positive emotion. You know, if I'm going to make a wonderful commercial on television, I think we still use television, right? I need to make it full of puppies and babies and lovely things that are obviously emotive in that way. Or I need to overdo it with seductive appeals that really draw someone towards wealth, prestige, or sexuality. It's all obvious and kind of generally positive in the direction that the advertiser wants you to go. Now, I'm going to challenge that too. We'll come back to that in a minute. Or as a result of just aiming for positive and reducing the negative, we end up using very vague emotional invitations. And then, because they're vague and nonspecific, we rarely measure the effect of their affect. So affect being the kind of fancy word for emotion when used as a noun. So keep that in mind. I made it sort of pithy intentionally so that you would want to remember, let's measure the effect of our affect. What do I mean by these three things? Number one, I want to, as I said, have you divorce this idea that emotion and reason are separate. It permeates our entire culture. If you get attuned to this, you will read it everywhere you go. You will see people discussing it as if there is a dichotomy. This is not true. The head and the heart are intertwined, maybe not with such funky lines as I've drawn here on this slide. No thought is either rational or emotional. All thoughts are both. In fact, the very belief that you are being rational is itself an emotional conviction activated by the emotional centers of the brain. This is actually very new science, in that only in the last 10 years have we had the ability to look with enough resolution into the minds of people as they are acting, thinking, and emoting, and be able to realize that these systems are constantly working together. And in fact, they work so effectively together that they don't work in sequence. You might think that you see something in your environment, a wonderful ad, and you say, or an email invitation, and you say, oh, well, I'm processing that reasonably or rationally right now, and then emotion comes in afterward and says, well, should I care about that or not? And that would seem really interesting as a way to synthesize what I'm telling you, that reason and emotion are always present. No, it actually turns out it's much more complicated than that. Before you're even conscious that you have seen the email, your emotion centers are already starting to predict whether or not you should even pay attention to the email before you've consciously seen it. And it's doing that drawing on prior expectations set by you reading email. It's doing that by prior expectations set by you seeing certain keywords in those email subject lines or in who that email is coming from. That all is happening so quickly that your very interest in clicking on that particular email to open it up has been triggered by an emotion that preceded your action, didn't follow it. That's how interwoven these things are. There's a really fascinating book that came out earlier this year called How Emotions Are Made by really the expert in this new and emerging science that I strongly recommend if anyone wants to get into it, you read. I won't go into it further here, but it's really, really great. Second thought that I mentioned, it does matter which emotion you aim for. General positive affect is nice. I guess it's better than negative affect. But really, excitement, for example, is different from fascination. It motivates different processes inside the reasoning and emotive capacities of the brain. Achievement is different from encouragement. These are related concepts, but they are subtly different in ways that then shift the way the person receiving your message is able to act on that information. And because the emotion center is unique to each individual based on their prior experience, your customer is arriving prepared for some emotions more readily than others. That's a function of who they are. It's a function of what they're expecting you to do for them. And that means it's related, their emotional preparation is related to your category, because they have certain expectations of the category, your brand, because they have certain emotional expectations of your brand, and certainly your experience, because they have certain emotional responses to the experience that you're delivering, the words that you're using, the way you've crafted your message, obviously the way you've crafted your mobile app, your website, your product experience itself, from unboxing down to customer support. All of those things are not giving the customer specific emotions. They are inviting the customer to respond with emotions that that customer was already ready to feel. Now, I know I'm getting a little complicated when I say it that way, but it's quite easy when you reduce it to this phrase. You are inviting people to feel emotion. The more specific your invitation, the more likely their brain is to be able to see whether the invitation makes sense for them or not. Think of it like inviting someone to a party. You wouldn't say, we're going to have a party this weekend, hope you can be there. You would tell them where it is and when it is and what will happen at that party so that they can begin to process whether that party is relevant to their interests or not. The same thing is happening with the emotional center. It's just happening in under 300 milliseconds. And it's continuing to happen over and over and over again. The recommendation that I give people is be specific. If fascination is different from interest, or encouragement is different from achievement, then make sure that your offer aims for one or two of those things so that you know whether those are the things that your customers are responding to or not. If they show up to your party, but you don't know why they showed up because you weren't specific in how you offered, you're just grateful they came. Good for you. But you can now, today, be specific. So digital, and this is one of the beauties of the time in which we live, gives us the chance to deliver emotional invitations at scale. So we can put specific emotional words, images, and even video voice conversations that will become very commonplace as ways to interact with customers in the future. Digital lets us deliver those emotional invitations at scale, personalizing them, eventually down to the specific individual. That's what's so powerful. Because if you talk about delivering emotion at scale, many advertisers will say, well, yeah, I watch the Super Bowl every year. I totally know what you're talking about. No, that's delivering an emotional invitation at scale. I'm talking about delivering specific emotions to specific individuals at scale. And that's a completely different thing. The beauty of it is because we're delivering information to a specific measured individual, we can test and refine what it is we're offering to them. We offer them encouragement, and it turns out they really needed achievement. All right, we can change that. AI is crucial to this because AI helps us scale up our ability to test what it is that we've done and even make suggestions about how we can improve it. And that's one of the things that makes me so excited about this webinar today, is that it would be exciting to me if you left this conversation after we're done here and said, well, I do believe that emotion is not only more crucial today because consumers have to make so many more choices than they did before, but it's also more accessible to us as marketers because of the digital and AI technology that's available to us. Hooray. But I'm even more excited because you're going to see now, when I finish, as we hear from Greg and David, that this is doable for more and more types of media over time as these technologies get to scale. So I'm excited to get out of their way and let them tell that story. Let me just summarize what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to do the emotional work on your side, meaning process your own emotional offer. What is it that you're asking your customer to feel when they interact with you? It's not just the lack of negative feelings or the aspiration of some general positive feelings. It is specific emotions that you're inviting them to come to the party to do. And that way, you do your emotional work, and then you're letting emotion do the rest of the work for you. And then you get to be the emperor sitting on the throne that the customer is actually happy to affiliate with, so that not only your personal life, but your marketing life is awesome. So with that, I thank you so much for your attention, and I'll hand it back to Greg to run from here, and I look forward to talking more through some of the questions in a few minutes.
Thanks, James. Really appreciate that. Again, from a Persado perspective, we find James's work really interesting because there's so much what we do from the machine learning, from the AI perspective, has pointed us back to the power of emotions and how they can affect things. And hopefully I'm going to be able to walk you through some examples to see how that really plays out in the real world. To start off, I want to start with a concept and really talk about how we've already kind of done a lot of this in the past and what's changing. And it's really when we talk about going from a physical store-driven environment is how I'd like to tell the story, to moving things online. So that's how I'd like to kind of set up the explanation of how kind of things can work and how you can really unleash the power of emotions. Because e-commerce has brought us a ton of benefits to both retailers and consumers, but a reasonable question is, when you move things online, has that taken the opportunity for us and our brands to emotionally connect with our consumers due to the medium? So I'll start by highlighting a key difference between selling to a customer via a sales rep in a store and doing that on screen. Now this, I could use the same type of example outside of retail, many other industries. Just hopefully by telling this story, I'll be able to bring it home with something that relates to everyone. The difference is that humans can learn on the fly when we're having a face-to-face communication. A simple conversation can provide you with a wealth of data and emotional insight. For example, if you're a regular shopper, and this is the theme I'll go through, the store sales rep may know how frequently you buy, how much you spend, a little bit on your demographics. They can see who you are. We can do all that and likely more than that in the digital world, but all the data we get digitally tells you nothing about the emotions, or does it? The additional color that these human interactions bring may be the fact that the shopper, in this case, really hates being rushed. This woman is very achievement-driven or likes a challenge. The rep naturally reads these signals and discovers the aspects of how a shopper will respond to that rep's particular communication or selling style. In fact, we all do this every day in every conversation you have. We see how others are responding to us. We change our language, change our tone of voice. even the choice of words to grab or maintain someone's attention. We can all tell when someone's drifting off, and we're going to make those changes and adjustments. It's just a part of who we are. We'll also speak very differently to individuals we know. And why do we do that? Well, we've learned their likes and dislikes over time from previous interactions, how they respond to being more forceful or more encouraging. So we'll change our language, our style, everything about how we're talking with them. But at the end of the day, it's still me. I've got the same personality or brand voice in the case of a brand speaking to their consumers, but I'll use very different language and tone for people who respond to different styles. So that's really key to kind of setting up the scenario. In the example I want to walk through, a sales rep would use the knowledge about this shopper that came in to buy a dress, and she's learned a lot about this woman from the interaction. She knows she's getting a new dress for her new job. So the rep subconsciously, without even thinking about it, as James mentioned, a lot of these things happen kind of naturally, that we don't even think about it, but it's going on, that she's going to tap into emotions about achievement. The rep knows she deserves a dress to wear for a new job. It isn't about recognizing her as a loyal customer or that she can save money with the kind of the special sale that's going on now. She knows what's really going to resonate with that customer as well. You really deserve this. You've really earned it. You got that promotion. You've got the new job. It's great. That's what salesmen do naturally, and that's what good salesmanship is about. It's really about being able to understand who you're talking to and evoke the right emotions and the appeal to your product. Now, what happens when a screen gets in the way? How do you get the emotional learning that sales rep could get from that face-to-face interaction? Well, as we mentioned, we do have tons of data about the woman that should help us out, and it does to an extent. But when we want to sell the dress, the way the process works online is you've got a copywriter in the marketing department that's coming up with an assumption on the best way to communicate, not specifically with her. It's usually to an entire database or a segment of the database. And that copywriter may or may not know the emotional impact they'll have based on the language they choose. And I think several of the points James hit during his presentation, which I think really speaks to what Persado does, it's very nuanced. You could think, hey, I'm being positive, I'm not being negative, but the difference between fascination or excitement that might have a big appeal in the message is really hard for a person to kind of work through in that message. So what happens many times is that we might tap into the wrong emotions that have a negative impact on performance. And many times there's not enough emotion in the message, so it doesn't have an appeal overall. In this example, the same woman, I'm taking it from the store example to online, received an email, and the email subject line, as you can see up here, really stressed urgency, as you see that highlighted in the message. Only 2 days left. Well, this is a pretty common mistake in retail. Urgency is a widely used and frankly overused emotion. And when we knew something about this shopper specifically, she didn't respond well to being rushed, will probably lead to this email being ignored because it's not going to tie into the cues that she's looking for as the emotion she's ready to receive, as James was talking about. It really just didn't activate the right emotion in our shopper to move through to that purchase. So what we're really about, and what I want to walk you through of how this works in specifics is, what if you could really read all those signals digitally, and if you had that learning, be able to generate the precise language and emotions that could resonate down to an individual level. This is where the potential that James mentioned really comes into play. We now have the capability to put those reams of digital data to use in determining a person's emotional preferences. And that's really important. It's a lot of what I talk through. It's, as a human, you read that naturally. Machines, it's not done naturally. You have to train them. You have to understand the context, what to do. So the way we've done that is, you can see here in that wheel inside the person's head, we call it the wheel of emotions. We look at 15 different emotions grouped into 5 categories that are used to determine customers' response in the context of marketing and advertising. There are plenty of emotions out there, but they're really not helpful from a marketing or sales context. And that's really what we focus on. And that's, from an AI perspective, something you have to do. You have to understand the context and really get good and deep in one area. So once we've learned a person's emotional tendencies, the next thing is the challenge of, if I told you, hey, achievement is this shopper's driver, what kind of messages could you generate around that emotion? Well, we've built the world's largest database of marketing language focused specifically on that. You see a number of examples tied to some different emotions here, but that's really what it's all about, is taking the millions of alternatives that you could present to sell someone a dress, a cruise, a new credit card, whatever it would be. But the process really works very similar to that face-to-face interaction and rapid learning that humans do. But it's AI that's doing this from every interaction we've ever observed. We've got 1 million+ words and phrases with over 1 billion of impressions against it that allows us to learn at scale. Side benefits of this are some things that I think a lot of the clients we speak to don't want to do, is they don't want to use the same language over and over. They want to speak in the same brand voice but not use the same words. They also don't want to sound like their customers. Machines are actually great at identifying that and giving you alternatives that are going to be in the right emotional tone that will be best received by your customers, but not repeating. So getting into a little bit of the specifics, and this kind of highlights, I think, as James talked about, there's emotion, but there's always rationality tied into that. You can't just have an emotional appeal with no description of the product or no other information about the sale or the party invitation, as he mentioned. So the way we do this, and to take all that into account, is this diagram shows you all the elements that we take into account when generating language. The key is, and why we're so interested in emotions, is that emotional piece is usually 60+% of the impact. It's by, on average, it is always the driver. But the descriptive components, your call to action, the formatting, and even the positioning, where the language sits, do you make the emotional appeal first or last, do play important roles, and also vary widely depending on the marketing channel being utilized. A lot of the examples today we're talking about email, but it really applies whether it's a landing page, a social ad, display, the same concepts apply. So in this structure, we also use something called experimental design. And what that does is it allows us to really amplify the learning that we're getting to get, really have an exponential curve of this learning via the AI. The best way I like to explain that is, if you were trying to learn what we're learning through these experiments using A/B testing, it would take years of doing one-off A/B tests to get the learnings we're going to get from a handful of campaigns. And with that, I'd like to, hopefully, that everyone has a little bit behind how we work and how the machine works. I'm going to show you the output and kind of the before and after, if you will. So just laying out the format of some of the case studies I'm going to walk through, and these are all, as I think I said earlier, joint Cheetah Digital and Persado customers, and these are real examples that have come out there. You're going to see the original message, or we'll talk about it as the control sometimes. So this is what we're given, and saying, hey, what can we do something better using AI? So this first example is in the media and entertainment space. And you can see, kind of highlighted in the red box, that the emotions of anxiety and gratitude in the AI creative were much more engaging than the original message. And I want to highlight one thing. The second message had these new emotions that we put in that we thought would be very, very well performing with this, but we left out the 50% off. Now, this is something that's often a common misconception, and it's really not a misconception. It's a weighting that they think, wow, that's such a huge offer. That should be front and center. That's going to drive how people appeal to this ad. Well, in fact, it didn't, because we left the 50% off out of the message and just had the emotions in it. And you can see we had a huge increase in clicks and in conversions from that change from a discount focus to an emotional focus. So moving into a different industry, talking about travel and hospitality here, and it's a cruise line, I wanted to point out some of the learning that we get from our AI process. A lot of what we hear from, kind of AI these days is scary. We don't know why it's working or how it works or what it does. One of the unique things about this process is it's going to give you a ton of learning about exactly what appealed. That grid I showed you of the 5 different elements, which emotions, you learn a ton through this process. So in this particular one, I'll tell you that the emotional element, anxiety and exclusivity here, that had a big impact, actually drove 96%, almost 100% of the difference between those two was all purely based on emotion. So that's unusually high, but you're going to get that understanding in the detail of what was driving the creative performance so that you can understand that and use that in other elements of your marketing as well. So moving on, another one with a broadcast company in media and entertainment. I think this one's a very interesting example when you're doing the comparison because the initial message is equally, or I think frankly more intensely emotional than the Persado message that we created. This is a testament to the fact that using emotions isn't enough. You really have to understand the framework. A lot of marketers are experimenting with this kind of language, but if you don't understand those nuances, you can have a big impact the wrong way, as we've talked about. James mentioned one of the things was staying positive with your emotions being a key. Here the original message uses all negative emotions. Attention please is an anxiety message, which can be very powerful and good, but they're tying it in with guilt as another emotion, too hot to miss. The switch in the strong performing message was using achievement and gratitude, and it had a much more positive result where you see 100% lift in clicks and 25% or 26% in opens. Kind of moving on, going into a very different field, this is with a Fortune 100 financial services company. We've demonstrated through a lot of these the power of emotional language and a huge impact it can have. I've mentioned 60% on average. I want to highlight one here where we'll learn about some of the other language variables that can drive engagement. So as we talked about, there's always emotional and rational, and here the descriptive elements of the winning message. Of course, emotions were key, in driving this, but we also optimized the language around the description of the features and benefits. And that's something else we can learn through this AI-driven process is what are the things that are really going to appeal and how you describe your offer. So what are the key elements I want to mention? Is it lounge access or is it additional points? Or what would it be? Is it you get to choose the category? Do I name my brand or the card or not? Those all can have significant impacts on the performance, and you need to be able to learn about that in a systematic way. Okay, hopefully everyone's getting the hang of these now and how they work. So in this example, I wanted to focus on something a little different, and that's the impact on revenue. One of the questions I get many times is, hey, I understand you can get people interested or excited if you change the language. Isn't that really clickbait? Is that really going to drive my business? And the answer is yes, actually it will. And actually the way the tool works is you can target an increase in opens, clicks, or down funnel and conversion. And you can have a big impact when you're focused on those down funnel metrics, and it's by the same concepts. Again, because of the way it works and it's optimizing based on what your target KPI is, it can really have an impact at different points in the funnel. And here you see we're driving over 100% more revenue, again, by a different emotionally driven message. So to kind of wrap up the case studies, I wanted to get a little different. We've talked a lot about some email ones. Here's one where it's a media brand working with us outside of email. And the goal of this campaign was to increase subscriber acquisitions via Facebook. I think the main thing I want to highlight here, we've been talking so much about language, I want to mention images. Images are also something along with language that can really evoke different emotional appeals or emotional triggers. The difference between the control and the winning message is really driven a lot by the image in this one. The image is actually a safety emotion. It's a fireplace. It's a warm, safe feeling in the winning message, and that was a key driver when you look at it from an emotional perspective. And the impact of doing that, we're able to have over 100% lift in clicks, and you drop your cost per acquisition in half. So the takeaway here is that images as well as words can have significant emotional impact. All the previous examples were focused on audience, and I think James went through this pretty clearly, talking about the Super Bowl ad down to talking to an individual person. Persado also gives you the capability to determine the optimal creative by segment or even down to the individual emotional preferences of a person. Whatever a lot of clients focus on, and to kind of bring that point home, are these different segments. I'm sure a lot of you out there trying to figure out, what's my messaging to millennials? If you're in travel, you might be trying to figure out, business versus leisure travel. You should be speaking to all those segments different, because they really do have different emotional triggers, and it's going to make a huge impact in the performance of your marketing if you're able to change that language and change that emotional appeal. Similar to the face-to-face examples we went through, in all these cases, the more interactions we have digitally, we're going to understand more and more, eventually getting down to that individual level, which I think is the holy grail of what we all want to do, is make the right offer and the right emotional appeal to the right person. To wrap up, I just want to share kind of the range of impact of using emotions. I think hopefully everyone gets from James and myself, and we'll follow through with David, how important emotions are. But I'm here giving you the range of, wow, how effective can using one emotion versus another one be? Well, there's a huge impact. What you see here is from all the work we've done in 2017, we've normalized the performance of emotions. Again, this is across all industries, and it does vary very widely by industry, of showing you that relative performance. You look at the top end, anxiety, achievement, and gratitude were the strongest performing emotions, where urgency, encouragement, and challenge were the lowest performers. The question I'd ask you guys to be thinking about on the phone is, what have you been using in your marketing language? Have you been doing it consciously? How many of you through this webinar have been thinking, wow, we use urgency a lot in our messages. That might not be the most effective emotional appeal we can be making, and maybe it is overused. We can run this data specific to industry, channel, life cycle stage, and it will show you how things differ. It's one of those that we've found very powerful in just opening people's eyes to the power of different types of emotions, and frankly, what you've subconsciously likely been doing in your own marketing but may not have realized, and that there's a ton of potential based on what else you can tap into. For anyone on the webinar, we'll follow up with an email after today, and if you'd like a personalized analysis of your own brand's emotions that have been used, we'd be happy to do that. Now I'd like to turn it over to David, and he's going to share Cheetah Digital's insights into many of the operational elements that have a huge impact when using emotions in your marketing, on how you can operationalize that or execute that on a day-to-day basis.
Great. Thanks, Greg, and thanks for sharing those great examples. That's great work you guys are delivering with Persado. I want to spend a few minutes talking about a client who I think has done an incredible job of evolving its marketing beyond just brand-focused messaging and more towards customer emotion-centric engagement. Williams-Sonoma Incorporated, which includes brands such as Williams-Sonoma, the Pottery Barn brands, and West Elm, has focused for decades on creating memorable and emotional experiences in store, online, and at home for their customers. They've continued to evolve their marketing strategy to be designed around cross-channel customer journeys that cater to the emotional moments in their customers' shopping experiences. And Cheetah Digital is helping them achieve this kind of moment marketing. So Pottery Barn is a joint client of Persado and Cheetah, and they've been working with us to cater programs and experiences to one of their most important customer groups, expectant parents. And I think we all know this is a really emotional time for parents, and Pottery Barn knows this as well, and it wants to help make that 9-month experience memorable and less frustrating for the moms and dads to be. Their goal is to constantly provide their customers with an experience that elicits positive emotions and mitigates the bad emotions that come from frustrating customer experiences. So while a customer is expecting, customers can go through a wide array of emotions, from the sheer joy of when you're first going to find out you're having a baby, or even possibly through the gender reveal, But there's also moments when a mom or dad's stress level is off the charts, and it's while they're planning for the birth of the child. The amount of stuff that you have to deal with is actually astounding. And when someone goes through, wrong experiences, like when the crib arrives late or in the wrong color or even damaged, your customer's frustration will be through the roof. And these moments are emotional, and as a retailer, if we understand and embrace them, it can help create a very, very powerful customer experience. So for customers that identify as expectant parents, Pottery Barn is going to leverage their data to identify what trimester the customer is in. And then they're going to use various data points based off of online and offline interactions to choreograph cross-channel marketing programs that aim to deliver customers the most appropriate content, language, messaging, and product or service at that moment in time. So the experiences that customers have on their websites are going to be personalized to where they are in their marketing journey. The email they receive isn't just going to be talking about the products that they may be interested in, but also the content that is relevant to the moment that they're in. The messaging is going to tie to the emotion that the customer may be feeling at that specific point. And Pottery Barn isn't just triggering marketing messages. They're actually also sending triggers to their store associates and designers, having them reach out to customers to help at those moments where they need it the most. This goes beyond just good marketing. Pottery Barn is actually appealing to the emotional needs of their customers. So what does this actually look like in action when a marketer is going to use great data and strategic planning to think through the emotion-driven moments for customers? It means that when Pottery Barn learns that a family is expecting, they can go beyond just recommending products and become a helpful part of the planning process by introducing the soon-to-be parents to their free nursery design services. They may actually introduce them to their local designer that lives in the community to help them through that process. They can also assist in making sure the registry gets completed. And more importantly, that when they're in the store, they can receive personalized attention. But also in the bad situations, because they're connecting their customer service systems to our marketing platform, when something does go wrong, their orchestrated journey is going to adapt accordingly and hold off promotional messaging, which could actually anger that customer. And instead, they might alert their local store associate to give that customer a call and actually personally help them through this moment. So these negative experiences are powerful emotional moments for customers, and if you as a marketer can respond to them well, they're a great opportunity to further demonstrate your dedication to the customer and help build loyalty with you. But here's where I think actually Pottery Barn really, really nails it. When their expectant parents pass their due date and they see that the baby has come, they know that everything has changed. And so the time for traditional marketing is really past. At this moment, Pottery Barn is going to trigger a surprise and delight campaign from the Williams-Sonoma brand, where they can leverage your local stores to send a delicious, ready-to-eat meal to the new parents with a message congratulating them on their baby's arrival. So for one, from a purely marketing strategy perspective, they've just introduced the customer to another one of their brands. But from a customer perspective, Pottery Barn and Williams-Sonoma have shown a true recognition of the life cycle of their customers' emotions. They've demonstrated empathy in a way that builds a rich, long-term relationship with that customer, and regardless of how or where they interact with them, whether it's in digital channels, one of their local stores, through service reps, or their network of partners. So Cheetah Digital helps bring this together in the marketing suite by helping to orchestrate these moment-driven touchpoints on top of their traditional journey marketing and batch marketing programs. It's critical that marketers develop prioritization among their campaigns to ensure that they're focusing on emotion-creating moments and speaking and responding to those before traditional campaigns are going to go out the door. And Cheetah Digital helps clients do this using our best-in-class technology and service. We help to ensure that the timing, the content, channel, and strategy of campaigns results in the best outcomes. And we work hand-in-hand with great partners like Persado, who make sure that the language and the messaging in these communications is flawlessly optimized to cater to the emotions of customers. So the marketing suite can ingest and process terabytes of first-party data, marketing data, real-time customer behavioral data, and tie it together with real-time cross-channel execution. Our goal is to help deliver highly personalized communications in any channel. And just as important, we have an army of amazing service professionals who partner with clients and partners like Williams-Sonoma to help design solutions that delight our customers and drive high-value outcomes for marketing teams. So when you partner with us, our experts are going to join forces with your marketing team to ensure that your programs are successful, your customers are engaged, and your business continues to grow. Yeah, and the Cheetah and Persado teams are really looking forward to doing a lot more with Williams-Sonoma and brands like this to drive new emotionally thoughtful programs, and we're looking forward to more. So thank you.
Wonderful, David. That was really super. Hey everyone, this is James McQuivey from Forrester jumping back in. A couple of thoughts I've had as I've listened to Greg and David. And David, it's funny, we finally got to the word terabyte by slide 41 in the deck. What I think is kind of a wonderful irony here, I'll just make this observation, I'll see what you think, is that this technology, incredibly sophisticated, it relies on amazing amounts of data and sophisticated management of these things, but it's actually all of this technology that's making us able to be more human than we were before. Helping these first-time parents plan, it's a very human thing. And I guess I'm struck with the wonderful irony that I think is positive, that the more technology we have, the more human we're able to be with our customers. And I got to believe a client like Pottery Barn is looking at this technology not as a technology, but as a way to do the very human thing they went into business to do in the first place.
James, I think that's a great point. This is Greg. I mean, we've had that observation a lot. And Persado is a company driven by math and science and data, and it's funny that the outcome of a lot of what we do is to tell marketers that they haven't been emotional enough in their messaging or focused on the right emotions, but it's all math and science driven. And instead of painting the bleak picture of a cold world coming with machines driving everything, it actually can enable us to be more human, more mindful, and focus on the right things with our customers, and being able to do that at scale. Totally agree with the observation.
Yeah, I like the at-scale part. Go ahead.
And I'll add as well, when I talked about technology, I concluded by talking about service, because I think what we've realized is marketing is really, really hard nowadays. And the amount of things you have to think of about how your customers interact has changed. And so having great technology is an important part. But that's part of why service is such an important part of our business. I think having an extra group of people available to help think through the outcomes of what you're delivering is critical. So for us, service is just as important as the technology behind it.
Yeah, no, super point. So a question that came to my mind, David, while you were talking is, in using all this technology, all this data to be more human, that's great. But I could easily see, and I've talked to so many clients and companies who are in this situation, so I'm sort of channeling them. I could easily see someone say, well, hey, that's a great aspiration, and someday I'm going to get there. But, it's maybe not to say urgent, although Greg talked about urgency maybe as not the best motivator, but maybe they don't feel like it's urgent to do it because you're just talking about making things a little bit better, getting them a little bit more lift, and of course we'd like all that, but if we're not prepared to do it, we're just going to keep doing what we're going to do in the meantime. Is there a downside risk of inaction? And that's maybe the twist to that. It's not just what's the uplift, but is there a downside risk to inaction if a company's like, we're okay with what we're doing right now, and we're not going to worry about that for a while to come?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would definitely say so. There's been think of a story that we've been discussing around the office, and it relates to Airbnb, which I think most people know of. And unless you've been living under a rock, you know that in the last month or two, there's a lot of hurricanes going on in the country, in the Gulf region. And right around the time of Hurricane Harvey, we saw an email going around from Airbnb advertising their floating homes and waterfall slides to customers in Texas. And the messaging was talking about how to spend a day without touching dry land. And I stopped to think this is a perfect case where when you don't think about the emotions of your customers, you're really going to screw things up. So they sent this campaign out to everyone. If you go on Twitter and Google and search for the campaign, you'll see a lot about it. But it's a perfect case where marketing strategy, building out calendars, looking at your business goals came before thinking about the customer's needs. It was a very marketer-centric approach, but the reality is that the brand should have been stopping thinking about their segmentation and who's receiving these communications and how are they going to feel about it. And I think we really have to build in thinking about the emotional state of our customers into our marketing strategy. I mean, it's a terrible PR incident for Airbnb, and when you read it, it's almost hard to imagine that they got this out, but sometimes it takes a great partner to stop and think through these things. So it has been a big water cooler topic for us.
Yeah, I bet. It raises a really interesting question that I think goes back to that figure that Greg showed us. Greg, you were showing the cumulative performance of the different emotions over 2017. That was very fascinating stuff. When I'm looking at that figure and I'm listening to what David just said, I'm realizing that, on the one hand, your customer may have a certain set of stable emotional preferences, but they also can fluctuate, depending on, time of year, life stage, phases that they're going through, whether the baby was just born or is about to be born, to use the pottery barn example, but, the Airbnb example, whether they're in the middle of storms or not. How do you guys deal with helping people understand both the permanence of certain emotional states or traits, as well as the passing or transient nature of certain emotional states as opposed to traits?
It's a great question. Because it comes up a lot when we get, hey, if I work with you, can I just learn what emotions work with my customers or segments? Then we should be good. And the answer is no, because just like the examples I went through and how we all kind of think and work, it's that constant learning and that constant feedback. Just because you're talking to someone one day in a certain tone of voice doesn't mean that it's going to work the next day. We see huge changes. Like if you think about, as we come up on a year anniversary of a pretty significant election in the country, the tone and what was working prior and what was working post completely changed. And you look at other events that are going to drive that, and if you're not constantly out there, and I think you had a number of places in your material, James, kind of that testing and learning. If that's not part of what you're doing, you're going to miss those changes and those trends. We see the top emotions change on a quarterly basis across categories, and that can, that varies within brands. So that's definitely very relevant. We view this is something that should become second nature, not something you do to find a few things out and then move on.
That raises a really important organizational question or culture question perhaps, because, if someone says, yeah, I just need to learn my check the box emotions and then I'll just check those boxes in the future, like you say, but then they do miss the opportunity to participate in the changing emotional landscape that you just described. But to me, the bigger problem I hear in that is that someone is essentially saying, yeah, we don't actually care about the emotions that they're feeling. We're not actually having empathy. We just want to know them so that we can use them in our materials, which I'm not saying I'm making it sound like that's a morally wrong way to approach it. I think it's a morally insufficient way to approach it, that you're saying this needs to become just a habit, that we are constantly saying, how does our customer feel? And I think that has to be something that the organization is committed to and is perpetuating with technologies like yours. And I wonder, David, do you see any organizational ways that people are able to move themselves more towards this kind of human and empathetic approach as a matter of habit, not just a technology that they want to employ?
Yeah, I think it starts, and I mentioned earlier, with strategy and planning. I think we've become victims of our own calendaring and our own triggers. And for us, when we, like in the Pottery Barn example, it started with talking to them about how they want their interactions with their customers to go. And we designed programs really around that situation. It goes beyond just thinking about what's the Monday mailing, what do I need to get out this week to, what are the types of relationships, and then building tactics and strategies against that. I think fundamentally you have to rethink your entire marketing program to do so. It has to go beyond just, what are my primary KPIs to deliver from, getting products out the door to what are the ways that emotions are going to affect my campaigns. And so, Sonoma did a great job of rethinking their entire approach to marketing, but it has to start at the beginning. It has to be part of your strategy up front, and then you can operationalize around it.
Yeah, that's super.
And let me add one thing, James, because I think it's an important point you mentioned. It's like people think about how does this really work? It's like, are you, if you're trying to learn, what are you trying to do? I think in the example I walked through with the shopper, it's like, if you think of it, it's you're wasting interactions or wasting the potential if you're going to someone with the totally kind of wrong message. And I think of it that way. It's not only a missed opportunity, but in this age of so much bombardment of getting messages all around, if someone, continually is speaking to you or not hitting, the right flavor, you will, you don't want to be kind of that person that, as you talked about, everyone's their own emperor, so they get to choose the people they work with now more than ever. If you're not continuing to make that connection and have that engagement, that's a huge opportunity to kind of miss overall.
I guess we're concluding pretty definitively that there is a downside risk to not doing this. And I would have to confirm that from my perspective of consumers becoming more emperor-like every day. It's not like they're at the emperor level and they've stopped. They're going to continue to have other companies deliver more emotionally meaningful experiences to them, to the point where their expectations for you will be going up at this same rate. Anyway, David, I think you nudged me. You wanted to ask a question.
Yeah. I was just curious if you had any practical recommendations on how brands can actually make emotional intelligence part of their marketing strategy. What have you seen brands do?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Part of the question is where they put it in the organization. I'm working with people who are in marketing, and I'm also working with people who are in a kind of customer insight or data insight role. I'm also working with people who are in the customer experience, in a CX kind of role. And what's great with any one of those individuals is they are usually passionate, and their teams are usually passionate, and they're using great technologies like these and others to make emotion a more specific part of how they understand the customer and how they act on that understanding. Is great. I think the biggest challenge is that it's usually that department that gets it and the other ones do not. So I'm working with a large shoe brand maker right now, and athletic shoe maker, and I'm not going to say it's painful for real, but it's almost painful to see the enthusiasm and the intelligence that in this particular case, it's a customer insights team. They've developed so much deep understanding of the emotional needs of their customer base, and they've segmented it out by product and by customer type and by time as customer, really great dimensions. So they've operationalized it very effectively. But then because they're not technically in marketing, they're in innovation, the marketing team says, oh, that's really interesting stuff. Now we're just going to keep doing the same marketing things that we've been doing for the last couple of years because we're hitting our targets. And so to make this really work, there actually has to be some deliberate coordination across those lines. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what tool or vendor you employ, it's not going to matter. I know we're getting close to the end of time here, but Greg, one of the things I mentioned before, I was really excited about that graphic that you showed with the different emotions that are performing across the year. The highest performing one was anxiety. It actually was a surprise to me. But I did notice the next 3, 4 were very, very positive, and I was kind of curious if it's the combination of those things that makes it particularly effective. You did one of your examples. You actually saw anxiety combined with gratitude, and I thought, wow, what a really smart use of a negative and a positive. What are the emotional insights that you're seeing as you're thinking through what results you're getting?
The emotions, and I'm actually leads to a good question or a good thing to share. When we get to these emotions, and I see some of the questions from the folks on are, what does that really mean? And that's one of the questions. Is anxiety? What words or phrases are associated with that? And how do you put those together? I mean, the emotional appeal in these different emotions do, as I mentioned, change by category and by context. But I'm going to share something I put on screen. I get this question a lot to try to give a little insight into how it works. What I'm showing is an image of how we like to share. We call it an emotional brief on what this means. So when I talk about anxiety, that's one where you can see a lot of things here. It's like brace yourself, your attention please, heads up. Those are all, think of it almost as anticipation is part of the emotion too. It's getting you to get ready, to think about something. It's putting you in that state. I think going back to your primal examples, you get into, hey, this is your warning, what's coming next? So you're kind of alerted to pay attention more. And that's something that can have a big impact. Now, when you tie it with something, and I'll put one of the common misconceptions, like safety is another emotion that when we talk about it, a lot of people will say, well, what are things that are tied with safety? That really doesn't apply to my product or my service. Safety doesn't come into play. Well, safety is more about having the consumer not go wrong with what you're offering. You're not kidding. Hey, you're finally there. You're approved for this. It's all good. It's these different emotions. And what we try to do is share, and that's a big part of the learning, hey, when we've learned this about your segment, about your brand or your industry, how can you take that learning and apply it, whether you're creating a 30-second spot or you're working on some in-store advertising, whatever you're doing, that learning and knowing kind of the words, the phrases, the images, how can you apply that across is kind of a key takeaway, so that anyone who's listened to this can go through and say, if I know this, hey, I can build up a lot of marketing around that as well by just having that insight. And that's, I think that's, we're running about time, but I think that's a key takeaway.
Yeah, we'll have to. We're not getting to all the questions. So a lot of good ones just started coming in here in the last few minutes. So we'll make sure that we get back to those via email. And there will be a recording of everything we've done here that will go out, if I'm correct, tomorrow for those of you who are registered and were with us. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to thank Greg for giving me this chance, David for giving me this chance to participate. This was really super valuable for me, and I hope everyone else. Thank you so much.